I'm going to make the announcement again, but for those that are French speaking and require English translation, you're going to get headsets. From where you are sitting, we'll just ask that you indicate to the team if you have that requirement. For I think for everybody else, we're going to from English to French, you're going to have an opportunity to get, if you're already logged on, you'll get the translation on PC. But we will give you the full details just now. Thank you for your patience. We should start shortly. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, if you join me in welcoming, ordinarily, of course, we are all her guests, but in Africa, the question of host is reciprocal. So join me in welcoming the President of Ethiopia, Her Excellency Sahle Work to Tana, 9th Tana Forum. Your Excellency, welcome. Excellency Meza Ashanafi, Excellency Musa Faki, the Chairperson of the African Union Commissioner, Excellency Dr. Vera Songwe, the Undersecretary General and Head of UNECA, Excellency Ministers of the Ethiopian government, Excellencies, Commissioners of the African Union present and Directors of African Union institutions, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps and members of the media, welcome to the 9th Tana Forum. So I just needed to remind us who and what Tana is. And I know many of you are Tana veterans. Most of you are Tana veterans, but there is something worth noting about Tana which distinguishes it from any other platform that you may have attended. This is the 9th Tana Forum, and the theme of the forum is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, revitalizing Pan-Africanism for sustainable peace and development in Africa. Tana itself is an informal space for candid dialogue where we share experiences and ideas. It is intergenerational in nature, multidisciplinary, and when I asked the leadership of the Tana Secretariat to give me phrases or words which describe their own experience of Tana, I can reduce these into 4, which is realization of Pan-Africanism, African agency, and collective self-reliance. Is that we conduct Tana on the basis of Chatham House rules, which means that no attribution of views to a person's institution and no reference to necessarily to the person unless if they consent to it. The other thing about Tana is that because I will have said most of the protocols and the official opening will have dispensed with the protocols, we will ask that you be not offended if the reference to your 5 doctorates, or if you are a triple excellency, or you hold 5 positions in 5 global institutions is acknowledged. And I know that some come with an impeccable CV of unparalleled achievements. In Tana, in order to equalize the discussion, we normally would just refer to you as either distinguished participants, excellency. If you are referring to me as simply Brian or Tamuka, I have no claim to fame or any position in any institution and have not yet achieved anything except today I'll be helping steering you forward. There's going to be a Munich security conference after this opening event. That side event is a closed session. It is by invitation only. So if you have not yet received your invitation and your link, I will kindly ask that you you take advantage of the evening, keeping to the rules of social distancing to enjoy Addis and contributing to the Addis economy. For those who've been invited, please do remember the social distancing rules that characterize this virtual Tana. I would like at this moment to invite His Excellency Gedu Andagachu, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who's going to do the honor of introducing our esteemed and special guest, Her Excellency. Your Excellency, please come and do the honors.
Your Excellency, Sahle-Work Zewde, President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Excellency Musa Faki Mohammed, the Chairperson of African Union Commission, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you all to this annual flagship security forum known as the Tana High-Level Forum on Security in Africa, which is convened by the Institute for Peace and Security Studies at Addis Ababa University. This initiative was a response to the call for Africa-centered solution and the treatment of peace and security as a collective challenge to Africa. For the past nine years, through changing political landscapes, the Tana Forum has emerged as an independent and informal gathering of Africa decision makers, high caliber intellectuals, stakeholder groups, and their larger constituencies for an open discussion on peace and security issues and challenges facing our continent. Tana Forum hosts delegates from the governmental spheres, including heads of state and government, as well as AU organs and regional economic communities. It also brings together the African private sector and civil society networks. It also involves valued non-African partners and regional institutions such as the United Nations and the European Union. The hallmark of this premier forum is encouraging open and frank discussions on the most pertinent security issues and challenges facing our continent. Madam President, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, due to the unprecedented challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, the 9th Tana Forum is forced to abandon its tradition of physically gathering on the banks of Lake Tana under its signature baobab tree. The government of Ethiopia, which has supported the Tana Forum since its inception, would like to take this opportunity to reconfirm its continued support into the future. It is a source of satisfaction to note that the forum has been able to effectively adapt to the changes brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Tie, Foreign Minister Gadu, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all, the audience here in Addis Ababa, and many of you joining us on this. I'm sure that they wanted to keep the momentum the forum has created over the past years. They certainly wanted also to wanted it to live up to the expectations it has raised. Indeed, Tana Forum is more than its location. Over the past years, it has emerged as a unique gathering, bringing together concerned Africans and partners from the rest of the world. Tana Forum is indeed a platform that strives to meet the intellectual challenge of African-led discussions and solutions to the problems confronting our continent. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, Tana Forum is too important to wait until conditions are right for a physical meeting. I'm confident that we will continue to enjoy the same spirit of frank and open dialogue in the current virtual setup as well. I'm pleased that this year's theme of the forum relates to the revitalization of Pan-Africanism, a culture in which I had the preservation of our continent. This ideal spread throughout the continent, matured in the mind of our founding fathers, and contributed to the creation of the Organization of African Unity. The African Union perpetuates this Pan-Africanist ideal. It strives to keep the African countries and people together and assist them in their collective efforts towards achieving a peaceful and prosperous continent that is playing a dynamic and constructive role in the world. This forum is also the illustration of the determination of representatives of the current generation of Africans to play their role in promoting Pan-Africanism and enhancing our continent's capacity to seek solution to its problems, thus enabling it to emerge as a strong force for peace and prosperity. This year's theme, the African Continental Free Trade Area, revitalizing Pan-Africanism for sustainable peace and development, is indeed timely and relevant. We are in the midst of turbulent times. The health and economic challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic have negatively impacted the global economy. As we respond to the pandemic and look towards recovering and resilience, we must consider the transformative positive impact that the African Continental Trade Area promises. In fact, this pandemic and the multifaceted disruptions that it has caused have shown us the importance and value of inter-Africa trade more than ever before. According to the African Development Bank, the agreement could expand the size of Africa's economy to the tune of $16 trillion and boost intertrade by 52.3% by 2060. These are not just numbers. These are processes that would translate into inclusiveness, employment of women and youth, and much more to the population projected to reach 2.5 billion by 2050. Studies show that the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement has the potential to lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty. It will help African countries to diversify their exports, accelerate growth, and attract foreign direct investment. However, achieving its full potential will depend on putting in place the right policy and trade facilitation measures. Although the AFCFTA and the broader free trade discourse is highly technical and understandably so, I have no doubt that this unique hybrid forum, which includes the thinkers here with us, will shed more light on the subject. Mesdames et Messieurs, les principaux objectifs de l'Union africaine et de ses États membres, que sont la paix, l'intégration et le développement, sont interdépendants. La progression de l'un contribue à l'avancement des deux autres. Il en est de même pour leurs échecs. La paix est au cœur de tout développement durable. Autant l'OUA a joué un rôle crucial dans la libération du continent et la lutte contre le colonialisme et l'apartheid, un rôle similaire dans la réalisation d'une paix et d'une intégration durable revient à notre organisation continentale, l'Union africaine. La paix, l'intégration et le développement sont les piliers qui peuvent donner corps à l'idéal panafricain. En effet, si les idéaux inspirent l'action, les actions concrètes et le progrès à leur tour nourrissent les idéaux. Le panafricanisme est vital pour le développement de notre continent. Aujourd'hui, le panafricanisme devra se mesurer à sa capacité à répondre aux exigences multiples des nouvelles générations. Pour devenir réalité, il a besoin de vecteurs pour le porter. Depuis la création de l'OUA, un certain nombre d'initiatives ont été prises pour promouvoir l'intégration et le développement, tant au niveau régional que continental. Aujourd'hui, la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine est l'outil, le vecteur fondamental qui permettra à l'Afrique de réaliser pleinement son potentiel. Avant de conclure, je voudrais vous assurer que l'Éthiopie continuera à œuvrer pour la réalisation entière de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine et des idéaux énoncés dans l'agenda 2063. Mes remerciements vont à toutes les personnalités qui ont contribué à forger la crédibilité et la réputation du Forum de Tana. Je remercie la Commission de l'Union africaine, son président, dont je salue encore une fois sa présence virtuelle parmi nous, pour leur appui inconditionnel au Forum. Cependant, le Forum n'aurait pas atteint ce niveau sans la participation active et les précieuses contributions de tant d'Africains de différentes régions de notre continent et de celles de nos distingués partenaires du reste du monde. Je leur exprime ici ma gratitude. Je souhaite plein succès aux travaux de la 9e édition du Forum. Rendez-vous à Bahardar l'année prochaine. Longue vie au Forum de Tana. Je vous remercie.
Please, another pom-pom. I would like to invite to the stage an outstanding leader and Pan-Africanist. She's a development economist with a public sector heart, a private sector mind, and a passion for getting things done. She's currently an associate partner at McKinsey & Company, based in Nairobi. But she works globally with governments to transform their agriculture sectors and with private sector agricultural input and food companies to better serve their farmers and consumer. Ladies and gentlemen, Amanda Oko Mbaka views leadership as a call to service and is passionate about building inspirational and data-driven leadership in Africa. Today, she's going to help us to steer the next session. We could be in no better hands. Amanda, please come and join me on the stage. Please give her a pom-pom as she comes. Excellencies, the sub-theme of Tana from the first Tana to now has always been Africa can, and Africa must, and Africa will. So as we discuss, it's about Africa can, Africa must, and Africa will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian, for those very, very kind words. It's a privilege and honor to be here with you today during this opening panel, where we're going to start digging into this question of revitalizing sustainable peace and development across the continent through the Africa Free Trade Continental Area Agreement. We have a number of incredible guests who will be joining us today. I'll do some very brief bios, and under the direction of Brian, I will spare many of the honorifics. But you all have a USB in your beautiful leather Tana bag that has full details of the speakers. The run of show for the next hour or so, we will first have some keynote remarks from His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, who is the current AU Commission chairperson. He's a constitutional lawyer by profession, and in his illustrious career spanning over 30 years, serving his own country, Chad, he actually also served as the chair of the UN Security Council in December of 2015. So Your Excellency, please trust I will be asking you some very tough questions with regards to how we're managing peace and security on the continent today. We will also be joined by His Excellency John Mahama, who I believe is on the screen and will be joining us shortly, the fourth president of Ghana. I always joke, I spent over 4 months in Ghana last year and I left without a Ghanaian husband. President Mahama, in addition to being the fourth president of the Republic of Ghana, was also a founding member of the Tana board. He's very passionate about issues of climate and sustainability, and a lot of my questions for him will go in that direction. Last, but most certainly not least, we will be joined by Fabricio Hochschild. I always get the second name a bit twisted. He's currently an Undersecretary General for the UN and is leading the charge to celebrate the UN's 75th anniversary, which is something for all of us to celebrate. In his illustrious career also with the UN, has held several positions in the field and across Africa. And we're really excited to hear from him more about how the UN's role goes forward in an Africa where we're envisioning a much stronger AU, we're envisioning much stronger regional commissions and bodies as well. With those few opening remarks, I'd like to hand over to His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat to give us the keynote and welcoming address.
Excellence, Sahle-Work Zewde, Président de la République démocratique fédérale d'Éthiopie. Excellence John Dramani Mahama, Président du Conseil d'administration du Forum. Madame Vera Songwe, Secrétaire exécutive de l'UNECA. Monsieur le ministre des Affaires étrangères d'Éthiopie, distingués participants, Mesdames et Messieurs. La zone de libre-échange continentale africaine pour revitaliser le panafricanisme pour la paix et le développement durable de l'Afrique. Voici une thématique au cœur de nos préoccupations et au centre de nos actions. Son choix par le Forum est un choix particulièrement judicieux. Il montre combien le Forum de Tana porte les préoccupations et soucis de l'Afrique et du panafricanisme. J'en félicite vivement les organisateurs. Le Forum de Tana a toujours été et demeure un espace intellectuel privilégié de réflexion sur la paix et la sécurité en Afrique. Je suis persuadé que la présente édition, même tenue virtuellement, ne dérogera pas à la règle et fournira par la pertinence de ses analyses et la profondeur de ses échanges les outils nécessaires à de nouveaux progrès de la pensée. Mesdames et messieurs, le panafricanisme est un esprit, une âme qui porte le rêve de grandeur, de gloire, de liberté et de prospérité des peuples et de l'homme africain. Il a, à travers les étapes successives de notre histoire politique et intellectuelle, revêtu des formes et embrassé des projets selon les temps d'Afrique. Idée de libération du colonialisme, idée d'émancipation de l'apartheid, idée de démocratisation et de refondation institutionnelle, idée d'indépendance économique et de développement. Les périodes se succèdent, les idées panafricanistes s'égrènent sur le long chemin de nos trajectoires. Présente aujourd'hui comme le contenu le plus substantiel du panafricanisme, car avec lui et par lui, elle donne vie au rêve d'unité, d'intégration et de vitalité économique. Ils sont tous les deux chevillés à une vision et un destin commun pour le peuple et les pays d'Afrique. La paix et la sécurité sont l'indispensable environnement et soubassement d'une telle ambition. Les multiples projets que porte cette zone de libre-échange, en particulier le développement et la prospérité, sont tributaires d'un climat de paix et de sécurité. Permettez-moi de m'attarder sur la manière dont la ZLECAf peut revitaliser la paix et le développement durable sur notre continent. La zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, projet phare de l'Union africaine, vise à supprimer les barrières commerciales à travers l'Afrique par la libération des tarifs ainsi que l'élimination de toutes les formes d'entrave. Ce faisant, elle jette les bases d'un marché commun unique de plus de 1,2 milliard de personnes. Elle permet également de promouvoir les liens entre les pays par le développement d'infrastructures au-delà des frontières physiques, facilitant ainsi la libre circulation des personnes, des biens et des capitaux. Excusez-moi. Ces mouvements intégrateurs vers l'achèvement d'une Afrique sans frontières, en termes économiques et commerciaux, offrent les ingrédients propices à l'émergence de grandes économies d'échelle et autres avantages comparatifs aux attraits indiscutables pour les investisseurs. La ZLECAf, puissant instrument d'intégration, émerge ainsi en toute logique historique comme une étape nécessaire à l'instauration d'une Afrique unie. Quelle belle consécration du panafricanisme que ce présent qu'offrent nos dirigeants à nos peuples et à nos rêves d'union de toujours. Le protocole de l'Union africaine relatif à la libre circulation des personnes, du droit de résidence et d'établissement fera de l'Afrique la maison commune de tous les Africains. Nous pourrons alors, munis du passeport africain, voyager en liberté et en communion à travers tout le continent. Mais le point de départ de ce beau rêve est la signature et la ratification de ces protocoles auxquels je convie ardemment tous les pays qui ne l'ont pas fait. C'est aussi l'autorité et le dynamisme que nous voulons bien conférer aux communautés économiques régionales, indispensables paliers de notre marche vers l'intégration. Mesdames et messieurs, l'harmonisation des politiques économiques et commerciales entre les pays africains, l'alignement des programmes nationaux de développement économique et social sur ceux du continent et de la génération, des résultats à fort impact sur notre processus de développement durable, emboîteront les pas au programme de convergence macroéconomique en vue d'asseoir, dans une perspective stratégique, l'approfondissement perpétuel de notre processus d'intégration inclusive. Avec une convergence économique plus soutenue, la possibilité d'une monnaie africaine commune apparaîtra irréversible. Les sentiments, pulsions et motivations panafricanistes, où tous les pays mettent en commun leur souveraineté collective, créeront les bases fondatrices d'institutions supranationales, juridiques, fiscales, monétaires, des droits de l'homme et d'opportunités d'emploi pour les centaines de millions de femmes et de jeunes. Quoi alors de plus incitatif au recul des violences, du crépitement des armes, de la prolifération des foyers de terrorisme pour la paix et la sécurité qu'un continent d'union, d'harmonie, d'intégration, de liberté et de prospérité. Les violences ethniques, communautaristes et confessionnelles, les égoïsmes nationaux toujours vivaces et les frontières nationales étanches reculeront inexorablement. Si l'État-nation en Afrique tel qu'il est actuellement configuré est trop étroit pour assurer un développement optimum et durable de nos États, une fragmentation supplémentaire au sein des territoires nationaux rendra encore plus ardue la réalisation du rêve panafricaniste. La zone de libre-échange apparaît ici comme une vraie réponse à de telles lancinantes préoccupations. Elle constitue aujourd'hui la meilleure voie pour revitaliser la fibre panafricaniste insufflée par les pères fondateurs et donner une nouvelle vie au traité d'Abuja. La pleine réalisation de la ZLECAf nourrira de sa sève l'interdépendance, la fraternité, la tolérance et la solidarité quelque peu malmenée. Quelque peu malmenée hier par les politiques coloniales et aujourd'hui par les ingérences extérieures. La Commission de l'Union africaine s'attache avec toutes ses forces, dont je ne saurais occulter la modestie, en étroite collaboration avec son secrétariat de la ZLECAf, à la mise en œuvre de celle-ci comme le plus bel exemple de réalisation de l'agenda 2063 et des aspirations qu'elle préfigure comme dessein stratégique et visionnaire. Notre engagement renouvelé pour une telle exaltante ambition demeure sans faille. À côté du président en exercice de notre Union, son Excellence Cyril Ramaphosa, président d'Afrique du Sud, nous nous efforçons dans le contexte particulièrement difficile du déclin du multilatéralisme et des ravages de la COVID-19, de garder haute la tête de l'Afrique et d'assurer que ses ambitions d'intégration et de paix demeurent vivaces dans les cœurs comme dans les esprits et les intelligences. Pour finir, je voudrais vous remercier de votre aimable attention et vous souhaiter de fructueux échanges. Merci.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those remarks. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A once we've heard from all the speakers. But if I may, one question, Your Excellency. The freedom of movement of people is a key tenet of the Free Trade Continental Agreement. The longest time I've not applied for a visa to travel in Africa has been this year, because I haven't traveled at all. It's also a key tenet of Agenda 2063. So we are all beneficiaries of this free movement of people. But there's a harsh reality for many Africans across the continent. 70% of Africans are employed by micro and small enterprises, whose reality with movement and trade is very different. Your Excellency, Mohammed, what promise can medium and small enterprises find in the Free Trade Continental Agreement, particularly those SMEs and smaller businesses that experience freedom of movement very differently?
Merci, Madame la modératrice. Je crois que la zone de libre-échange continentale est l'un des projets emblématiques de l'Union africaine. Nous savons tous que nous sommes un très grand continent qui recèle des ressources innombrables. Et nous savons également tous que le cloisonnement, l'extraversion de nos économies, l'enchaînement des ambitions de notre jeunesse et de nos entreprises n'a pas permis à l'Afrique d'exploiter tous ses potentiels. il est absolument nécessaire aujourd'hui plus qu'hier de rompre ces chaînes et de créer cette dynamique pour permettre aux Africains de commercer, de se visiter, d'exploiter les potentialités dans les différents pays et se permettre à travailler pour la réalisation, pour le rêve de cette Afrique que nous voulons construire. Le secteur privé africain, les femmes, les jeunes, je sais qu'il y a un dynamisme extraordinaire qui ne cherche que l'occasion pour pouvoir s'exprimer. Et en lançant cette zone de libre-échange continentale, je crois que nous avons mis la fondation nécessaire pour permettre à l'Afrique de montrer son intelligence et son génie pour permettre de réaliser le développement et la prospérité tant attendus.
Thank you, Your Excellency. With the genius and excellence that you've set us off on, I'd like to switch over to Ghana and to welcome His Excellency John Mahama to share some of his reflections, particularly on the report this year, the SPSA report, the current state of peace and security across the continent. Your Excellency Mahama, if you are still online, over to you.
It's fake news is when something is not real. So I will be President Mahama for today. President, Excellencies, this is not fake news. I may not be able to replicate the wit and the intelligence, but I will faithfully read. I will attempt to answer the question His Excellency would have been asked. If the answers are good, the credit comes to me. If they are bad, I think you always point at the top for responsibility. I remain loyal. Reflections and key highlights of the 2019 State of Peace and Security. Distinguished Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share with you key highlights from the State of Peace and Security report for the year 2019. 6 major conflict themes dominated the peace and security landscape in Africa in 2019. Armed insurrections, routinized systemic violence, human development challenges, xenophobia, environmental change, and governance. These themes produced various dynamics of sorts in ways they threaten security on the continent. Across many countries, incidences of armed insurrections challenged and intruded on the authority of the state, at the same time that they exacerbated the vulnerability of individuals and groups. Yet the signs are that a strong will to remake the security landscape exists, as do the foundations necessary to build the solidarity required to achieve this lofty but elusive goal. In 2019 was neither a unique year for peace and security in Africa, nor was it entirely the same as the previous years. The issues that animated peace and security on the continent in 2019 were products of the past, and in many cases underlined the longevity of many of Africa's challenges and opportunities. The coming into legal force of the AFCFTA makes 2019 a particularly epochal year, like the formation of the OAU in 1963 and the transformation of the OAU into the AU in 2002. The FCA thus represents an important positive moment in the advancement of the goal of integrating Africa's economies and building Pan-African solidarity. Distinguished Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 2019 State of Peace and Security report brings to our attention 2 key questions. The first relates to whether or not the year 2019 could be held up as a viable foundation for something bigger and more ambitious for the continent in the light of AFCFTA. and one from which lasting solidarities can be built and consolidated. The second is whether or not the year was merely another mirror which reflected the many future challenges capable of undermining the solidarity. From the review of the year, both options appear to be still on the table and in equal measure. For instance, despite how the security landscape continues to be punctuated by challenges like trafficking, violent insurgencies, and environmental degradation, which are capable of undermining whatever progress has been made to improve the lives of millions of ordinary Africans, the transnational nature of these issues suggests that greater solidarity, cooperation, and coordination are a necessity that can no longer be ignored. In that sense, within the risk lies the opportunities for remaking peace and security landscape. Yet many of the issues that undermine peace and stability on the continent are not dependent on the nature of relationships and exchanges between African states, but also are dependent on the exclusionary nature of economic production and wealth redistribution within African states. This year's report highlights the dense interconnectedness of Africa's security problems, recognizing that as crises that are inscribed on the continent's landscape and which transcend predefined borders, it also clearly highlights that these challenges are thematically interlinked in terms of how people encounter and experience them. The coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade Area may not be the magical wand that will bring everlasting peace, stability, and development, but it clearly offers an opportunity for Africa to press the reset button and set new goals. Distinguished Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, having detailed the overall peace and security landscape for 2019, I would like to point out certain specificities on the continent in terms of peace and security outlook. Africa's major hotspots like Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Libya, Sudan, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Cameroon, and the Democratic Republic of Congo remained unstable during the year, with state and non-state armed actors involved in each instance being no closer to finding common ground than they were the previous year. What became vividly clear and more troubling was that the geography of violence continues to shift, for the most part, away from their previous epicenters. Notably, in this regard, was Mali, where the transnational terrorist groups took advantage of porous borders and widespread discontentment across common borders to establish and strike deeper into Burkina Faso, Niger, Ghana, and Nigeria. Non-state transnational armed groups were by no means the only purveyors of violent conflicts on the continent in 2019. Much the same way as in the previous years, one of the consequences of weak bureaucratic and political structures coupled with fossilization of ideological posturing in the wake of the global war on terror has been the way in which the option of violent confrontation became widely privileged by state actors, even where evidence shows such pathways to have failed repeatedly and woefully. The disintegration of Libya offers a poignant example of how quickly relatively stable countries can descend into chaos. The fragmentation of political and military authority in the country continued unabated in 2019, with the April assault on Tripoli representing a new law, even by the violent recent history of Libya. The military stalemate after that assault has come on the heels of monumental humanitarian tragedies, with about 6,000 persons killed and 140,000 displaced in 2019 alone. Despite the presence of, or perhaps more accurately, because of the presence of many external actors in Libya, as in many other hotspots across the continent, the overall situation in 2019 could be characterized as one step forward, two steps backwards. Over the whole year, there was one single significant act that came from the UN Security Council, namely Resolution 2486, adopted on the 12th of September, and which extended the mandate of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL. Significantly also, the African Union's engagements have mostly been consigned to either humanitarian response, such as the repatriation and resettlement of African refugees in their various countries, or playing second fiddle as few centers of diplomatic activities with often mutually exclusive self-interests converge in Istanbul, Berlin, and Moscow rather than in Addis Ababa. Rising transnational Islamist groups are estimated to have caused a 500% rise in conflict fatalities in the Sahel region in 2019, with more than 4,000 deaths directly attributable to them, compared to some 773 years earlier. The instability associated with the many spaces of weak state control in different parts of Africa have created sanctuaries for a myriad of violent actors who have sought to replace the state by providing security, laws, and education that the state has failed to provide for decades. Adverse climate change continues to drive and exacerbate new forms of violence in the Sahel region, the most visible being that between farmers and pastoralist herders. This crisis is also driven in part by the impact of an extractive economy positioned around informal artisanal mining and trading, and the ways resources derived from these activities are then deployed to fund transnational Islamist groups. From the gold boom in the Sahel, to charcoal trade in Somalia, to the illicit mining and smuggling of precious minerals in the DRC, the artisanal mining sector reflects the dilemma of a potentially transformative economic opportunity growing in the context of crisis. This sector offers incentives that could provide sustainable conflict resolution, but which could also simultaneously fuel further violence. For a country that was once touted as the bastion of authoritarian stability, Burkina Faso's slide into political instability in the first 3 quarters of 2019 resulted from multiple conflicts that were intercommunal, Islamist, and political in nature. The rapidity and scale with which the situation in that country deteriorated gave the authorities and interested regional actors almost no time to elbow room to prepare for and respond to the crisis. With highly porous borderlands and shared social grievances, insurgency and terrorist groups were able to compound the already difficult conflict map in the country. The government has responded by promoting martial and authoritarian laws, some of which undermine press freedom. Apart from exemplifying the complexity of fighting an Islamist insurgency that is able to ride on the legitimate grievances about economic and political exclusion, several of the current conflicts raging on in the continent also demonstrate the limits of military-led solutions and the dire implications for peace building of a weak state capacity that is built around a strong authoritarian epicenter. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the persistence of violent conflicts in 2019 suggests that regional powers still struggle to resolve large-scale asymmetric armed insurgencies. But it isn't for the want of trying. Indeed, virtually all the major conflicts that raged during the year saw the mobilization of concerted regional, continental and international responses. Unfortunately, attacks against state security and international peacekeepers have increased dramatically in 2019, further damaging an already fragile security situation. The 2019 State of Peace and Security report reflects the consensus that insecurity is not only produced by the outbreak of violent conflict, but also by the social and material conditions of people's lives and the nature of opportunities or limitations that they face. It is obvious that a discussion of peace and security would be incomplete without an equally thorough examination of human security challenges, particularly those linked to poverty, inequality, and human rights. Africa is widely touted to be the last frontier in the battle against poverty, with about 70% of the world's poor currently living on the continent. Despite relatively high rates of economic growth recorded in the preceding decade, inequality has not only persisted, but in many cases taken an acute turn. This is evidenced by the unequal distribution of the benefits and pains of development across social groups, particularly the most vulnerable ones like women and children, but also between countries as well as within them. While there is a direct linkage between violent instability and poverty, this does not imply that relatively stable countries do not face difficult choices in the fight against poverty, given how the latter reinforces class and socially inscribed gender inequalities. Distinguished Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to reiterate the importance of Continental Free Trade Agreement, its nexus to peace and security in Africa, as it underpins the theme for this year's forum. By far, the most important and positive news out of Africa in 2019 was the coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Paradoxically, however, the bold step also carries with it significant prospects as well as risk for regional peace and security. Following the mandatory 22 signatories, the AFCFTA entered into force on 30th of May 2019 and has been hailed as a bold step towards subsequent creation of the largest free trade area since the World Trade Organization came into force in January 1995. Despite a generally optimistic outlook on the AFCFTA, it is important to note that it has the potential to exacerbate tensions and conflict if there's no rupture of paradigm. AFCFTA is driven by an Afri-liberalism that promotes competition and not complementarity and transfer among African economies. It is therefore likely to deepen inequalities across African economies and potentially increase the likelihood of the emergence of interstate conflicts. The journey towards AFCFTA had started 3 decades earlier in 1980, when the Lagos Plan of Action for the Economic Development of Africa was adopted by member states of the defunct OAU, the precursor to the African Union. With its ambitious goals, it is realistic to expect that the AFCFTA will significantly improve inter-African trade, boost incomes and welfare, and generally reboot a sagging Pan-African solidarity, but only if it is carefully nurtured to maturity. The promise of the AFCFTA will not automatically end some of the continent's long-drawn challenges, nor will it prevent from experiencing new ones, linked in part to the continental integration that a major trade pact like this will bring. The big puzzle to resolve is therefore how existing capacities at the local, national, regional, and continental levels are to be harnessed, and what new capacities need to be created to respond to these challenges. In terms of its design, AFCFTA is unique for Africa in 3 ways. First, it is the first truly continental arrangement focused specifically on integrating trade mechanisms and infrastructures. Second, it is different from traditional FTAs as it moves beyond the usual focus on trade in goods and services to encompass other aspects of international trade like services, investment, intellectual property rights, and competition policy. Third, it is emerging against a growing protectionist trend in international trade, which has seen the benefits of international trade and mutual benefit being vigorously contested by the same global powers that traditionally promoted trade as an important driver of growth. This nationalist bent, best captured by Brexit, the US-China trade war, and multiple sanctions regimes, suggests that beyond the rosy picture of the positive multiplier effects of continental free trade lies equally substantive and urgent challenges. Apart from the substantive concern that its current governance arrangement and a plethora of other domestic and regional politics may hinder the successful implementation of the AFCFTA, there is also the additional challenge of reconciling the tension between human rights promotion and trade liberalization. This is important in view of the common skepticism that trade liberalization, like structural adjustment policies, represents an ominous facet of neoliberalism that may not necessarily attend to the needs and priorities of the poor, but projects the interests and priorities of more affluent members of society. Distinguished Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while not featured in the report, COVID-19, as we are all aware, has wreaked havoc on all aspects of our societies. While responses have varied from one region to another or from country to country, the continental response of the African Union, led by the Center for Disease Control, CDC, has been remarkable. In the same manner, if we all can pull together and work collaboratively, the promise of the AFCFTA contribution to peace and security on the continent can be enormous beyond measure. The same can be said for the fight against all the numerous malaise that plague our continent. It is my earnest hope and confidence we shall together continue to work to address the challenges we all face on the continent, turning the challenges to great opportunities for the betterment of our peoples. Africa can, Africa must, and Africa will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. In the interest of time, I will save my very tough question for you for the Q&A and hand over to Fabrizio Hochschild, UN Undersecretary General and Special Representative to the Secretary General on the 75th and
Thank you. Let me say at the outset what an honor it is to be here among you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and in particular to take the stage with His Excellency, the President of the African Union, as well as with my distinguished and much admired former colleague, the President of Ethiopia, President Saleh Work, and also to be present with my current colleague, Vera Songwe. I was delighted to receive the invitation from President Mahama, and would like to thank him and all the Tana team for their cooperation and engagement around the UN's 75th anniversary. By all accounts, and I think President Mahama alluded to that in his words, our world stands at a pivot point. COVID-19 continues to exact great toll on our health systems and even more on our economies and our social systems. The impact of climate change is causing slower, but in fact, much greater damage to our planet. Social inequalities, geopolitical tensions, and the impact of digital technologies are testing the capacity of institutions, 20th century institutions, which were not set up for such challenges. 75 years after the creation of the UN, international cooperation is more vital than ever. And yet, as the words of the Secretary General, we have a surplus of multilateral challenges and a deficit of multilateral solutions. We are seeing a retreat from multilateralism with the resurgence of superpower friction and rivalry, a rise of isolationism, ad hoc shifting alliances of like-minded states, and generally a broad sense globally of multilateralism fatigue. Many analysts also decry the rise of vaccine nationalism or the self-centered approach to COVID-19 vaccine development by several countries. It's very reassuring and inspiring to see that this approach is not followed in Africa, as COVID-19 has in fact accelerated multilateralism in Africa to combat the spread of the infection while minimizing social and economic disruption. The African Center for Disease Control and Prevention, an AU entity, has worked to improve the capacity of public health systems to respond effectively to disease outbreaks. But beyond such examples of regional cooperation, which bring hope, there's a broad consensus among member states that we need to rethink the way our global institutions work and infuse them with new energy to overcome the dangerous paradox between the rise in global challenges and the decline in global cooperation. It was against this backdrop that my office launched the UN 75 initiative at the beginning of the year. It was the United Nations Secretary General's intention to undertake a global listening tour to seek fresh guidance, new inspiration from we the peoples, those are the first three words of the UN Charter, to help us to overcome the impasse in which we now find ourselves. To that end, we organized this year a series of global conversations on, and this title was given to us by the General Assembly, The Future We Want, the UN We Need. We listened to people across the world and received feedback from more than 1,000 dialogues in person and online. We've gathered well over 1 million responses in all 193 member states through a mini-survey. And we've worked with 2 renowned independent companies who've undertaken independent, scientifically sampled representative surveys in 50 diverse countries, including 20 in Africa, around the same questions. Finally, we reached out to universities, think tanks, and gathered their thoughts, their publications on the same questions. And the results are synthesized in the report we shared with heads of state at the formal occasion of UN 2075 on 21 September. So what are the key findings? First, striking against the backdrop here in New York of polarization, friction, disagreement, deadlock, that here too often characterize interstate dialogue. Across all regions, ages, and social groups, respondents were remarkably united in their priorities for the future, remarkably united around their fears and their expectations of international cooperation. This also came out from what we heard from Africa, as elsewhere. Amidst the current COVID-19 crisis, unsurprisingly, the immediate priority for most respondents, including in Africa, is improved access to basic services, affordable healthcare, safe water and sanitation, and quality education. Looking further to the future, the overwhelming concern across the world is related to the climate crisis and the destruction of our natural environment. And it's very striking that even while fears around public health threats have grown, the number one concern throughout the pandemic for the future remains the destruction of our environment and the climate crisis. Looking at the specific data for Africa, respondents from across the continent have also told us that environmental protection is crucial to them. But the main long-term priorities identified in Africa are respect for human rights, access to healthcare and employment opportunities, and conflict prevention and resolution. There's also a concern with corruption. Looking more specifically at peace and security issues, it was striking that people in Africa are mostly concerned with the risk of social unrest, violence against women and girls, and political violence. Respondents also shared their concerns with electoral violence, feminicide, sex trafficking, and domestic violence, and hate crimes, corruption, and inter-ethnic clashes. These findings underline that we must think of peace and security in much broader terms, not just as peace between states or between communities, but also within societies, within communities. And we need to do more to respect human rights, combat domestic violence, and contain the spread, often through social media, of divisive hate speech. With regard to perceptions of international cooperation and the UN, over 87% of respondents globally believe international cooperation is vital to deal with today's challenges in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. The figures are even higher for respondents in Africa. 75 years after its founding, 6 in 10 respondents stated that they believe the UN has made the world a better place. And looking to the future, an even larger majority believe the UN will be critical to tackling global challenges. And it's striking that, especially among young people, and more among women than men, there is overwhelming support for international cooperation. But it has to be said, respondents are not looking for more of the same, and the views they hold are not uncritical of our current forms of international cooperation, nor are they uncritical of the UN. They want to see a UN that better reflects the stakeholders of the 21st century, and not just the main power holders of the post-Second World War period. They want to see a UN that innovates more, and that is not only more diverse, but that is also more transparent, more accountable, and more effective. They want to see a UN that is less paralyzed by difference and much more inclusive. They want to see much better representation of youth and civil society. They want the UN to build stronger networks and cooperation with regional organizations, including the African Union, ECOWAS, IGAD, and the African Development Bank, so that we can create synergies and unity of purpose like the people of the world want us to, rather than just be a forum for divides and confrontation. And so if we listen to these views expressed around the world, and if we build more inclusive, networked, and ultimately more effective multilateralism, then the UN, the AU, and all our partners can build a better future that we collectively want, of peace, prosperity, and human rights for all. The Secretary General is now tasked with coming back to the General Assembly to submit a report of very concrete changes to honor the aspirations that came out of our consultations and to reinvigorate, renew, and upgrade the United Nations. The work of gathering ideas has already begun, but change and improvement will depend on all of us. We are all the United Nations, and we all need to be the change we seek. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Fabrizio. I have one question for you, and then would like to invite questions to the audience. My first question, though, will go to Her Excellency Sahle-Work. Fabrizio, you talked a lot about what the world hopes to see of the UN going forward, an inclusive, representative UN. What does this new vision you have for the UN and the Secretary General is building, what does that imply for all the regional bodies and agencies across the continent that are trying to do similar things, if it's the AU, if it's ECOWAS, if it's EAC? How do we all fit together in helping this future vision of the UN, but the UN also working for us?
I think traditionally there has been perhaps an attitude, at least among some, that the UN would somehow, as a universal organization representing all countries, that it somehow stood above regional organizations. I think the vision of this Secretary General is much more of a horizontal structure and what he refers to as networked multilateralism, whereas where the UN works as an equal partner with regional organizations, and where the UN leaves the lead to regional organizations and plays, where necessary, a supportive role, but in essence focuses more on those areas where universal approaches are needed. I mean, challenges such as climate change, challenges such as the impact of new technologies, challenges such as growing inequality out of in two or three countries, obviously need a strong lead from regional organizations, but ultimately will also need universal approaches. And I think that's where the Secretary General would see that we would act in concert with ever more empowered regional organizations and the UN playing a more complementary and supportive role. And I know that on the African continent, that has been very much the sort of partnership he's been working hard to build with the AU.
Thank you so much, Fabrizio. I think there's something in your comment that resonates a lot with what I heard from Her Excellency Saleh-Wok early on in her remarks, that for her, Pan-Africanism is about le pays au cœur. It's really about Africans, finding African solutions to African problems. Your Excellency, my question to you is really about how we think about Pan-Africanism across generations. I think every generation's fight for Pan-Africanism is different. A decade ago, I felt like my generation was lost. We didn't know what our identity in Pan-Africanism was. We weren't fighting for the liberation like our grandparents. We weren't fighting to understand what democracy meant for early nation states. So as you think about the next generation of Ethiopians who will take forward the Continental Free Trade Agreement and take forward this vision of Pan-Africanism, what advice do you have to them?
Okay, thank you very much. Before going to Pan-Africanism, if I could add, say a few words, I will take this opportunity to greet Fabrizio as well. You know, we always talk about international bodies, the UN, our continental organization, the African Union, and in many occasions, they think that the transformation of an organization depends on a commission or the secretariat for the Secretary Generals, for instance, for the UN or the African Union. Such organizations can only be what their member states want it to be. The responsibility is on member states. These are intergovernmental organizations. So you can, there is so much that others can do. In the African context, we have had 2 summits per year. We went to one and stuff like that. And the discussions concentrate on the agenda of the day. But we need more meetings where we discuss common issues and how to deal about it. This is what others do that lacks in Africa. Pan-Africanism. I shouldn't have said that I grew up in it. That's why the question came to me. But for my generation, it was the total liberation of Africa. So to have our independent states, our own borders, our own flag, and so on, to have our own identity. And I think we owe it to the OAU. We have achieved that. That ideal guided all of us to where we are today. Now, Pan-Africanism, and it's good that in the theme here talks about revitalizing it. It means that it's there, it has to be regenerated, if you don't nourish it, it won't go far. So for the new generation now, it's to understand that no single country can grow, prosper, when it's confined within its own borders. That's the thing that Africans should have to know, starting with us, of course, here in Ethiopia. And if we want a continent that counts, that is really well placed on the world stage, that is listened to, we have to know that our growth, our prosperity is when we are together. That's why maybe the walls, the borders that we have erected to remain, to become independent, have to be lowered so that we can move freely, so that we can trade, and so on. That's how we could avoid external interference and try to work for the continent. Otherwise, it will be difficult. So there is a shift in Pan-Africanism. Today, Pan-Africanism should be in really coming together, losing part of what you might lose for the interest of the many. So I think that's what I would say, and I would argue for when it comes to the new generation. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for those remarks. I think hearing you speak, a topic that has the essence of what you're talking about, no single country can solve it by itself, is really the issue of climate and issues of sustainability. Fabrizio talked about them, but I'm actually going to direct my question to Brian, AKA representing John. The issue of climate is one that's very near and dear to my heart. As an agriculturalist, there's some recent research we did at McKinsey that showed by 2030, about 40% of Ethiopian coffee farmers are at risk of having a yield loss of greater than 30% of what they have today. It sounds like a lot of numbers, but essentially the climate crisis is only getting worse. When I think about climate, I think about food security. As a representative of the Tana group, how can we frame the issue of climate sustainability as an issue of climate security? As we think about these issues of peace, we make sure that we have climate at the forefront. What do we have to do to make sure that it's a priority for our leaders?
Thank you. I think Africa needs to have a much more expansive conversation. It need to have a much more expansive conversation. The challenge in our development and security discourse is single issue focus. So for example, there are environmental challenges, and in the president's speech, there was reference to environmental challenges that may not necessarily, strictly speaking, be climate related. The pollution of underground water as a result of the mining that we do, that pose a health crisis or insecurity challenge that exacerbate our vulnerability to diseases. Then there is an approach to climate that decouples agriculture, land and environment, and other factors and concerns of production from it. I think the African approach to climate is its integration, not just in peace and security reimagination, but integration in development, governance, imagination, but integration also in how we imagine economies. Because unlike most, we are more dependent on rain-fed agriculture for our production. And if you want to then, it therefore determines three things. The type of foreign direct investment that we allow, because part of what's driving our economies is hyper investment in hydrocarbons, right? And that conversation is a difficult conversation. You've seen the discussion on coal, you've seen the discussion on other hydrocarbons. Number two, it will determine part of the infrastructure that we build in terms of how we. Number three, it will determine the reorientation of our national security services. Number four, it will determine how we reorient the humanitarian response preparedness of the continent, right? Because we've often dealt with humanitarian response as separate from security preparedness, as responding to a disaster like a flood. But if we integrate these things, which is a holistic approach to security, health, climate change, and everything that's required for us to produce what we eat and to eat what we produce and to be able to trade would be key. So I would urge that the approach I think that the president is advocating is inseparability of the human element from the environmental element, from the economic thinking, such that there's a continuum and we have Africans at the center of that thinking, so that security is not just about states projecting their security to threats that are like from other states or just insurgents, but other threats that come from how we produce, how we distribute within the economy, and also how we manage diversity and other relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have my last question, and then if our gracious host at the Sheraton can make sure the microphones are on so we can send them around to the audience, that would be really appreciated. My last question actually goes to His Excellency Moussa Faki. It's a question that has come up several times, including from one of our online participants. The power of policy, the power of bringing people together through legislation is something the AU has been at the forefront of for the continent. But the rubber really hits the road at implementation. And the year of 2020 is the year of silencing guns. The promise of many of the member states actually sitting here today was for this to happen by 2020. My question to you, Honorable Moussa Faki, if you can still hear us and are online, how has the African Union implemented progress towards silencing of the guns by 2020? And with a couple of months left in the year, what more can we do to try and silence the guns?
Taire les armes en 2020 fait partie des projets phares de l'Union africaine. Il est bien vrai qu'aujourd'hui, dans le continent africain, il n'y a plus de conflit inter-États, presque pas.
Honorable Moussa Faki, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Je disais que Taire les armes est l'un des projets phares de l'Union africaine. Vous m'entendez, j'espère? You listen me? Yeah. Alors, je disais que Taire les armes est un projet phare de l'Union africaine et nous avons placé l'année 2020 comme celle de l'achèvement de cet objectif, certes très ambitieux. Il n'en demeure pas moins qu'aujourd'hui, dans le continent africain, si on prend la zone du Sahel, nous prenons la Libye, le bassin du lac Tchad, dans la Corne de l'Afrique, particulièrement en Somalie, il y a encore des armes qui parlent. Mais il faut reconnaître que des progrès importants ont été réalisés. Et donc, il faut continuer à travailler dans ce sens en renforçant les mécanismes et les outils dont dispose l'Union africaine. L'opérationnalisation des forces africaines en attente, ça c'est l'un des éléments importants de notre stratégie continentale en matière de paix et de sécurité. Il faut reconnaître que la manifestation la plus grave actuellement dans le continent africain, c'est le terrorisme. Le terrorisme est un phénomène qui n'est pas endogène au continent africain. Il se développe aujourd'hui au Sahel, au bassin du lac Tchad, en Somalie, et il faut une action non seulement des États africains, mais également avec le concours de l'ensemble de la communauté internationale, parce que le terrorisme est une menace à la paix et à la sécurité internationale. Il est bien vrai que dans nos rapports avec les Nations Unies, nous travaillons ensemble, ainsi qu'avec d'autres partenaires pour pouvoir faire face au phénomène du terrorisme. Vous l'avez si bien dit, la détérioration de l'environnement les questions de pauvreté sont également des éléments qui nourrissent l'instabilité et qui ne permettent pas à ce que les armes soient tues définitivement. Je crois que sur le plan institutionnel, sur le plan légal, nous avons des outils importants que nous avons mis en œuvre et qui concourent incontestablement à l'atteinte de cet objectif qui est celui de taire les armes. Des progrès donc sont évidents, mais il y a encore des efforts importants à fournir. J'insiste sur le phénomène du terrorisme. Le terrorisme est un phénomène mondial. Le trafic des armes, le trafic de la drogue, le trafic même des êtres humains sont alimentés par des réseaux mondiaux et qui parfois prennent comme champ d'action le continent africain. C'est la raison pour laquelle il faut nécessairement, et dans le cadre du multilatéralisme, c'est pour cela que l'Union africaine insiste beaucoup sur la nécessité de renforcer le multilatéralisme pour pouvoir faire face ensemble à tous ces ingrédients qui font en sorte que l'on ne puisse pas facilement atteindre cet objectif qui est celui de taire les armes. Des progrès importants ont été réalisés, aussi bien par l'Union africaine que par les communautés économiques régionales. Et aujourd'hui, avec la réforme au sein de l'Union africaine, où une place importante est accordée aux communautés internationales, aux communautés économiques régionales, nous avons dans les 48 heures le deuxième sommet de coordination entre l'Union africaine et les communautés économiques régionales. Et nous avons insisté comme première phase de la division du travail entre l'Union africaine et les communautés économiques régionales, les questions de paix, les questions de sécurité et les questions de commerce. Je crois que c'est une approche importante sur le plan institutionnel et je suis certain que dans la pratique, cela va nous aider à renforcer davantage nos instruments pour pouvoir faire face à cette réalité et atteindre effectivement l'objectif qui est de taire les armes définitivement dans le continent africain.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We probably have time for 2 more questions from the audience. If there are any questions, I see one in the back there. If you could just please briefly state your name so we know who you are, and a short question directed at a specific member of our guests would be fantastic to keep us moving.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much. My name is Emmanuel Bensa, After Policy Network, Ghana. Okay, so my question is directed to whomever may choose to respond. It's basically in response to this whole question about silencing the guns. Here we have the case that in August this year, was 30 years since ECOMOG troops went into Liberia, okay? It was around the same time that we had the case of Mali. I think Mali has reminded us that silencing the guns could not be more important, okay? Even at the time that we're talking Continental Free Trade Area. Here's also the case that when we shift over to East Africa, the big conversation over there is on AMISOM, drawdown of troops. Whether Kenya is going to draw down its troops, whether it's Ethiopia, whether it's whichever country is going to draw down its troops, so that come 2021, Somalia will be left to its own devices. What are we going to do to have a conversation as we develop the conversation on building momentum around the signing of the Freedom of Movement Protocol? What are we going to do around conversations on linking the nexus? Because for me, it seems very clear that when you draw down the troops in AMISOM, for example, and Somalia is left to its own devices, there's going to be some kind of vacuum. Okay, so what will be the interest for Somalia, for example, to say that it's going to be interested in anything to do with issues around the African Continental Free Trade Area? For me, it makes sense that they would want to have some level of peace and security before they have that kind of conversation. Yeah. There's also this I've read in some circles that because of the contemplation of drawing down of troops, some of the funding may shift from East Africa to West Africa to help combat terrorism, which is gaining momentum. I know that in Burkina Faso and these other parts of West Africa, there are issues around terrorism because Mali, for example, has been in a hotbed of terrorism since 2012 when the coup took place. So what are we going to do about these things? Where we're trying to silence the guns?
I'm interrupt you.
Yes.
My apologies. This is a very heated question. Let me actually direct it to,
Yes.
let me direct it here to Brian. And
All right.
if I can paraphrase your question and give you a lot of time in the break to come and continue asking him for your answers. The question is really, how can we both...
If I may just quickly land.
In the interest of time, I'm going to have to just ask you to give me the trust to paraphrase the question.
I think where I'm coming from, you may not. Let me land on this one. Where I'm going to land is this point. I think on the freedom of movement protocol, we have not built the momentum in the way that we have done with AFTA. Okay, so I would like to see the space where we can call for ECOWAS and East Africa Community, who have done freedom of movement quite well because they are living it. They can move across the region quite freely. So maybe some conference of ambassadors of these two regions to spur the momentum on the freedom of movement protocol. Perhaps that could be a start to seeing some kind of momentum around the ratification and signing, because for us, it is too slow. AFTA has moved with incredible speed. In the history, when you look at it compared to the WTO, GATT has been going on for many years, many decades. The Uruguay round is still incomplete, but the freedom of movement protocol, businessmen, private sector people cannot move, cannot do business if they cannot move. So we need to get serious on the freedom of movement protocol. So that is my recommendation. EAC, ECOWAS, ambassadors come together and start promulgating this freedom of movement protocol. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've actually answered your own question. We have one more question right here with the lady in the red shirt.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Nicola Brennan. I'm Ireland's ambassador to Ethiopia and representative on the African Union. And I'm delighted to be here today. It's Ireland's first time to participate in the Tana Forum and also to support the forum. And it's really excellent to see the frank and open dialogue here, as is true to the values of the Tana Forum. And my question is either for the AU Chair, Moussa Faki, or indeed the Under Secretary General, Fabrizio. And it relates to the issue, both of them raised around strengthening multilateralism and the need for greater multilateralism in the context of the global dynamics and challenges that we're all facing currently. And where we see the African Union as the key entity on this continent for peace and security, and the UN Security Council as the global international body on peace and security. And really, I'd really like to hear from either or both of them on some key practical measures in strengthening AU-UN relations to ensure that African perspectives increasingly inform some of the key decisions that are made on the Security Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Nicola, for that. I think we still have Honorable Moussa Faki on the line, and we'll direct this question to him as a former chair of the UN Security Council. Honorable Moussa Faki, what can we practically do to improve the relationship between African countries, the AU, and the UN Security Council as we try and improve peace and security?
Les accords que nous avons avec les Nations Unies. En avril 2017, quand j'ai pris la direction de la présidence de la Commission, avec le secrétaire général Antonio Guterres, nous avons signé un accord cadre qui permet à ce qu'on ait une réunion annuelle de manière alternative, soit à New York, soit à Addis. Cela nous a permis, notamment sur les questions de paix et sécurité, de coordonner nos actions. Vous savez que plus de 60% des questions qui sont devant le Conseil de sécurité concernent la paix et la sécurité en Afrique. Nous savons tous quelles sont les causes profondes de la situation de paix et sécurité. La pauvreté, la criminalité dont le terrorisme, les questions de gouvernance, les changements climatiques, les causes sont connues. Et nous pensons, puisque la paix et la sécurité, le maintien de la paix et la sécurité est du ressort exclusif du Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies. Et puisque les États africains sont concernés, il faut qu'il y ait une coordination dans l'action entre les Nations Unies, entre le Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies et le Conseil de paix et sécurité de l'Union africaine. Là également, chaque année, il y a des réunions entre ces deux instruments des Nations Unies et de l'Union africaine. Nous insistons beaucoup sur le multilatéralisme parce que la lutte contre le terrorisme, par exemple, la liberté du commerce, les questions de développement, les questions de la protection sur les changements climatiques nécessitent des actions coordonnées entre les différents acteurs de la scène internationale. Donc, aussi bien pour les questions de paix que pour les questions de développement, nous avons sur le plan pratique signé 2 accords cadres avec l'actuel secrétaire général des Nations Unies et nous travaillons ensemble. Mais il faut faire remarquer que quand même certaines décisions ne relèvent pas du secrétaire général des Nations Unies. Et les membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies parfois agissent, parfois n'agissent pas, bloquent. C'est le cas par exemple du représentant spécial du secrétaire général des Nations Unies sur une question aussi grave que la situation en Libye. Depuis bientôt 8 mois, on n'a pas pu nommer un représentant du secrétaire général des Nations Unies pour la Libye. Et nous savons que la guerre continue. Plusieurs candidats, dont 2 Africains et pas des moindres, ont été proposés. Il y a eu certains membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité qui ont bloqué ces genres de décisions. Alors, nous pensons qu'agir de manière unilatérale, notamment sur les questions fondamentales de paix, de sécurité et de développement, est contre-productif et va à l'encontre du multilatéralisme.
Thank you so much, Honorable Mustafaki. I think it's actually a great way for me to try and tie together the conversation that we've had today. Thank you for trusting us with your time in this opening plenary. There's really 3 things I heard consistently across all of our speakers who were able to join us, and allow me to recap them for you here today. The first is that we are facing, and you are tasked over the next couple of days, with a really complex and challenging problem of peace and security and trade. The issues at the root cause of each of these areas are immense. We cannot talk about peace and security without poverty, without human rights, without climate change. This is a multidimensional problem, and so it requires both the candor that we've shown here, but also the nuance as we think about solutions that are not addressing single points. The second thing that I've heard, if the issues are this challenging and complex, then we need to be multilateral in our thinking and our decision making. No single agency can go it alone. We need to give each other the space to serve our constituents well, but also to collaborate. And the final thing I've heard is that we've made a lot of strides towards policy and legislation at a continental level. It's remarkable that we've managed to sign the Free Trade Continental Agreement last year. The task is really to go forward and implement it in manageable and tangible chunks. I leave you with a quote from Haile Selassie addressing the UN aptly in 1963, which I think is really apropos to the conversation we've had today, that the preservation of peace and basic freedoms requires courage and eternal vigilance. These lessons must be learned anew by each succeeding generation. The work will be hard, but we must do it. Thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of the Tana Forum.
When I first saw her name, I mistook her for a South African. Her name is Amandla, which means power. And then I saw Ombaka. I realized that the Obama effect happened on the continent as well. Then when I finally met her, I asked her, so when did you leave Joburg? She said, Kenya, actually. Ladies and gentlemen, Pan-Africanism is much more than symbolism. It's to reconcile 2 things: managing how we govern ourselves and manage our resources, as well as how we address issues of inequality, poverty, and justice, but also how we as Africans project ourselves on the global stage and assert our equal humanity. I hope I have been able to win an Oscar award playing president. They used to say that if you fake it until you make it. So I tried to be presidential. I even had a President Mahama look, but the accent failed me. So I thought that as we part, as is my tradition, I think, Madam President, you have grown a tolerance since many Tanas ago. I remember that there was discomfort when I first told a joke, and one of the senior leaders said, "You don't tell jokes when they're heads of state." I said, it's a... So I will tell you a little story as we go away. And that little story is what I learned working in Nigeria. You know, when English arrived in Southern Africa, the English folk came on a ship, right? And the fish didn't catch their language, right? By the time they landed, some of the English had been lost. So that's why you see when you come to Southern Africa, there's a mix of terms and so on. But by the time they go to Nigeria, there had been an indigenization. So I will teach you an English term. If you are here representing the United Kingdom Embassy, please accept that upon arrival on the continent, one of the ways of democratizing English is to break it or to speak it with a local flavor. So the term voguing, so it's called voguing. So in Africa, we explain terms through action. So if you don't know what voguing is, I'll demonstrate it for you. Nigeria Power Company used to have challenges. I believe in South Africa, you call them power outages. But in where I come from, we just say the power has gone away. Or we've, you know. So anyway, there were consistent power outages that the power company could not hold. So the people started illegally reconnecting power. Or alternatively, accessing power. So you see, because nomenclature is important, you can criminalize an act of liberation. The same way you can call a freedom fighter a terrorist, right? So they started alternatively accessing power. So it was in the old days where you used to have those poles, the electric poles. You remember those? The tall ones. So the people from NAPA, the National Power Company, would come and cut, literally, wires in order to disconnect, right? So one time this gentleman came from the power company, went up the pole to do the disconnection, and then this guy got an electric, what do you call it, fuel, hacksaw. You know what a saw is, right? And so as the guy was about to disconnect power on top, voguing happened. The guy says, "Oga, make you cut." I cut. What it means, it's okay, sir, you do your job. You are up there, you cut electricity, I cut the pole. So guess what happened? The guy at the top started apologizing. The only way to win in CFTA is through innovation. The best way to innovate is to first of all understand that power, whether it's trade, economic, social, or political, will not be donated because suddenly the globe has a sense of justice. It has to be taken, and Madam President reminded us that states have a role. And we were reminded by the other speakers that citizens have a role. Citizens as intellectuals, as business people, and so on and so on. As you go on your break, I want you to remember that the first place you do network is here. But because we are socially distancing and networking, I want to see how successfully you drink tea with your mask on. If you achieve that, then we know that Africa is now ahead of Europe and China and America. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening. Excellencies, thank you for your patience. Thank you for participating and for always being supportive to Tana. I was going to do something that is inappropriate because when I last was program director at Tana, the then leader of our host state It was the last time I saw, and then I read in the news that he had been assassinated. And I think if it does not offend your good sense, sir, or Madam President, I would ask, as I did yesterday, just for us to stand for a moment of silence in remembrance. He was a great supporter of Tana, and I am not wading into Ethiopian national politics. I'm simply keeping myself in the Tana politics that we remember our own, because any one of our supporters that is lost by accident, or design is a loss to us all. If it is okay with your excellencies, we just one small moment of silence in honor, and then we allow Madam President and the VIPs to leave. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Those who are joining the side event, please remember we will continue after the short break. Thank you. You have a wonderful, you're traveling back today. Okay. Okay.